So welcome, everyone. We're so glad to see you here for a second day. A quick reminder of what we're doing today before I hand back over to Tom, who's going to tell us a story. Tell us the story of his social enterprise, Enabling Enterprise. So just revisiting what we covered yesterday and what's in store for today. I'm excited to hear that you're looking forward to taking action today, and there'll be way more opportunities for you to take leadership and to work on issues that you're interested in over the course of today. So we started out yesterday talking about what made us passionate, what we thought leadership was, what we really cared about. We then spent time going out into the streets, some of us, talking to experts, some of us looking at the idea of reframing the question and thinking about what it is that we're really trying to achieve. We covered ideas like theory of change and coming up with a really compelling reason to do whatever it is that we do. And we talked about how important it was to do that, to develop kind of high social impact. And then we used that to some extent to develop ideas, and over the whole day, I've been so impressed at how many of you came up with ideas, put them on the board, and I know people were having conversations over lunch and in home group throughout yesterday about the ideas that you had. And so there's that piece of a kind of divergent process of thinking about ideas. And in the afternoon yesterday, I thought we had a really good session on making choices, on developing good judgment, on critical thinking, starting with the session with the city car on what is social innovation, what makes an innovation effective. So today, this morning, Tom is going to walk us through Enabling Enterprise. And we're going to do that for two reasons. One, just because we think it's a really good example of social innovation and it's interesting to understand how it works. But more importantly, to understand the idea of prototyping. And I'll say more about that in a minute, but basically the idea of trying, experimenting, and learning from what we're doing as we go through. And then later on today, we'll have an opportunity to talk about how we take action and turn our ideas into impact. So the shape of the day will be like this. We'll aim to pause for lunch at 12:30. Then there'll be an opportunity for group presentations this afternoon. We're really excited about that. That'll be the big opportunity for you to practice what you've learned. Then there'll be a space for home group and reflections. Then there'll be a quick wrap up where we want to hear your feedback on the Academy and how it should develop. And then there'll be home time. So just before we go into that, I just want to reflect, because today is about, there's going to be a lot of group work, and there's going to be more and more opportunities for you to take leadership. I just want to reflect on our ground rules from yesterday, just to remind ourselves. So I'd like you to all take a minute and think about what you think is really important for ground rules for today. So what do you think is really important when we're working together in groups? And what do you think is important for kind of keeping in mind when you're working with others and for kind of developing the skills for social innovation? Just take a minute to think about that. So, ground rules for today, how we want to kind of work with each other in groups, how we want to take our ideas forward, what kind of leaders we want to be, who'd like to share something that they thought about as an important ground rule for today. Yeah.
No judgment.
No judgment. That's a really good ground rule. Can it go up on the board, Louise? What else? Everyone should speak and everyone should listen. Mm-hmm. And how would you like people to react when people are speaking?
Yeah, I was talking, everyone should speak out and should listen as well, and they can add to each other's ideas when they do feedbacks.
Who else?
Respect the ideas.
Respect?
Yes.
Respect ideas, yeah. What else? Challenge your original assumptions. I like that one. And I think, what about, there's sometimes I think there are differences in experience in groups when we're working together in teams. Sometimes there are differences in expertise. So what do you think is important when you have those kinds of differences? Has anyone got anything on that? Yeah? What's that, compromise? Compromise. Yeah, I think that's a great one. So I think that's a really great list of ground rules. So it would be great if everybody could commit to those today in all of the group work that we're doing together. I should also reiterate a couple of kind of housekeeping things. We really want you to walk out of here, you the participants, to walk out of here feeling kind of inspired and feeling full of energy for taking action. And so we want to see you we working together as teams effectively. And so that's kind of your role, is to make sure the teams are working really effectively and you're learning together. And facilitators who are in the room, their job is to help you do that. So facilitators are here to help you make decisions, to help you learn, but effectively you are taking the leadership role, and that's really important for today. Okay, great. So, yeah, maybe you should keep them up here.
I'm going to keep them up here.
So the first session now is it this? No. Is about prototyping social business models. And we're going to use this social business model canvas. How many of you have seen this before? Anyone? So this is a kind of tool that we use to look at business models. I think it's helpful for helping us to have the same conversation, and we'll use it to discuss different ideas as we go through the morning. Before I hand over to Tom, I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of prototyping and what we mean by that. This is, I guess part of the thinking behind prototyping is sometimes it's helpful to come up with lots of different ideas, to sketch out lots of different ideas, to talk about them, to think about how we might test them. And then it's helpful to do that and then pick one after you've come up with a lot of ideas. And part of the thinking behind that is before you fall in love with an idea, really think it through, think about alternatives, and that helps kind of arrive at an idea that's better than the others. So over to Tom.
Okay, so well, good morning, everybody. I'm really excited today to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about enabling enterprise. Some of the conversations that I was having already with people yesterday, it was so inspiring to hear about some of the different projects that are going on. Obviously, particularly close to my heart, the different education projects that I've been hearing about already. And I'm really looking forward to over lunch and over the afternoon, particularly coming around and working with lots of different individual groups to hear a lot more about your ideas and the different things that you're going to be up to as well. But the thing I've been asked to do is to take you through enabling enterprise and how enabling enterprise came into being. Not because, and it's important to say this at the beginning, not because I've done everything right. I think as I go through the story, it'll become clear that actually lots of things I haven't done right at all. Lots of things went wrong initially. Lots of things needed to be changed. But I think that's actually one of the most important things in social innovation, is to be open to changing ideas, open to change and open to trying different things. And I think coping when things don't work out the way that you want to first time round. So I'm going to start by going through sort of the backstory of enabling enterprise, and then using that as a way to start exploring what was the business model to make it work, how did the business model change, but along the way as well we're going to get you to take the lead in coming up with some of the ideas. So it's almost a bit like a case study, I guess. I'll set the scene, then there'll be a chance for you to think about, well, what would you do? What would be your solution? What business model could you suggest? Who knows, by the end of the session, I might completely change my business model, which would be good. So it's very much a chance for you to think through the issues as if you were from my side. And then once you've had a chance to do that, you can then actually take that experience and apply it to whatever issue that you're really passionate about. And I know that's going to be the focus of later on today. So I'm going to tell you a story. I've got lots of pictures. There'll be a chance later on for questions and answers. So just take it all in, I guess. There we are. So, enabling enterprise, our story. So, this was me back in 2007. The end of my last exam. I'd studied economics and management for 3 years at Oxford University. This was coming out of the very last exam I had, which is a big deal. As you see, lots of balloons, lots of very excited people. And this was my college, which is really quite nice. I show you this because 6 weeks later, I was a teacher, which is quite a big step. So here you see Happy Tom. And then 6 weeks later, 6 weeks later, I turn up to be a teacher. Now, 6 weeks isn't a normal amount of time to become a teacher in the UK. But I was part of a program, and the idea of the program, which was called Teach First, the idea is to take people who wouldn't necessarily think about going into teaching, to give them a 6-week, very quick course in how to become a teacher, and then just sort of put them in a classroom and see what happens. So in the UK, we have a phrase which is called sink or swim. So, you know, put somebody in a swimming pool. Either they'll learn to swim really quickly, or they won't. And that's the sinking. So, thrown in at the deep end, 6 weeks training. This is the students chasing out their last teacher. So faced with quite a big challenge. So I want you to, when I set the scene, there are 3 big things that I want you to remember. The first is that I was 21. I had 6 weeks of training. And so really, let's be honest, I didn't know what I was doing at all. I remember before that first lesson being stood outside my classroom with a pile of textbooks and literally had no idea at all what I was about to do. Went in, set up the classroom, heard this awful noise coming down the corridor, getting louder and louder and louder, and suddenly rush into the classroom 30 14-year-olds, and it was chaos. I mean, literally chaos. I mean, so, you know, I tried to get them to sit down. They weren't particularly interested in sitting down. They'd rather run around. They'd rather sit on the tables than on the chairs. And I think just to illustrate quite how hard I found that first term, there are 4 particular stories that stick out. So the first, I'd only just been teaching for maybe a month, and it was time for the government inspection of the school. So in the UK, schools get inspected quite often, and you get inspectors. They come round. They don't go to many lessons. They go to a few different lessons just to make sure that the standard of teaching across the school is good, and that discipline is good. And so, you know, they don't go to many classrooms. I thought, I'll be fine. I'm a new teacher. They won't come and see me. They'll know I'm new. It's fine. So I was teaching one of my most difficult classes, and there was one particular point, and a particularly awful student was sort of playing around with his pen, and then decided to throw the pen at the door. The next second, I kid you, no more than a second, the door opens and in comes the government inspector. And if it had been 1 second earlier, that pen would have hit them straight in the forehead. So that was a near miss. Luckily, when the inspector was there, they all behaved, so it was fine. Otherwise, I might not be here today. So that's one incident. A second incident, which was a bit unfortunate. So I had to leave the classroom. I think there was a fight in the corridor or something like that. So I had to go out and, you know, break up a fight, you know, go and sort it out. But I'd set up my classroom. So I wasn't a very good teacher, but I really wanted to be a good teacher. And so I thought, well, I can't teach very well, but I can do lovely displays. So what I'll do is I'll make lovely displays on every wall, lots of work, lots of, you know, inspiring quotations, you know, which will change everything. I came back into my classroom to find that all my displays were gone. All the students were now armed with drawing pins, and they were chasing each other around with the drawing pins. Got them all settled down. Thought, oh, this is all sorted out now. They've calmed down, they're doing their work. Suddenly they were very quiet. Didn't understand that. So I thought, right, fantastic. They're settled down. Go and sit back down on my chair. And I suddenly realised why they were all sat there quietly watching Sir sat down on 3 drawing pins. And I decided at that moment I wasn't going to react. So I sat there, kept sat there with on 3 drawing pins. Again, quite a low point. This particular incident was one of the more dramatic. So I taught some very difficult students. As a business teacher, I had two different groups of students. So some were students doing A-levels, so students who'd chosen to stay in school and who I was teaching economics. And they were very keen, very clever, very bright students, really wonderful to teach. They really wanted to learn, and they all went off and went to top universities and did extremely well. And then I had another group who were all about the age of 14 or 15, who'd been put in business because they weren't expected to get any other GCSEs. This was going to be their only qualification. And they knew why they were there. They knew they'd been put there because they weren't expected to do very well. They had 2 years of my class, which they weren't very excited about. And the other big challenge is that their literacy, so their ability to read, was really, really low. But the way the course was taught was they were given a textbook and they were told that there's no exam, but what you need to do is you need to produce coursework. So you need to produce lots of written work to get your qualification at the end of it. Except none of them could read particularly well, let alone write hundreds and hundreds of pages of coursework. And I discovered really early on that this sort of traditional approach to teaching, traditional approach using a textbook wouldn't work. When I turned around to find one of the students was trying to set light to this textbook. So at that point, all the textbooks went away. And we tried something a bit different. So, 2 things to remember. Firstly, I was very young, had very little training. Second thing, I had very difficult classes to deal with. So, the challenge was turning a group of students who were something a bit like that into something that looked a bit more like that. And try to take students who were about as excited as that. That actually, I did have a student go to sleep in one of my lessons. But I didn't wake him up because he was quieter that way. And try to turn that into something a bit more like that. But it wasn't just a problem in my classroom. And I should make that clear. So, third thing that I want you to remember when setting the scene is that actually, although my classroom, particularly at the beginning, was quite dramatic, actually lots of the problems that I was seeing in my classroom were problems that were reflected far more broadly in the UK. It wasn't just that the students weren't engaged and weren't learning in my classroom, but actually that so many students in the UK leave school without being able to get jobs. Because either they don't have the qualifications, because often, very young, they didn't learn to read properly. So they go all the way through school, never being able to read properly, never being able to read the textbook, getting further and further behind, knowing that they're getting further and further behind, and therefore just completely lose interest in the whole thing. And so every year, these are just a few clips from the UK newspapers. You see, every time the exam results come out, you get lots of complaints from businesses that actually the students that they're trying to recruit aren't good enough for the job. So they don't have some of the key skills that employers want to see. Just things like being able to work together in a team, being able to organise themselves, being able to present their ideas. All of those really basic things which the students can't do. Being able to hold a conversation. It sounds silly, but you'd be amazed how few students, when meeting somebody new, are able to have a normal conversation with them. And how on earth can you work in a business, or work in any job really, if you can't get on with people? It's such a basic skill. In the UK, less than half of the students every year get 5 good GCSEs, which means 5 really basic exams, and they don't get them. Most students study about 10. The best students will study 15 and get top grades in every one of those 15. So some do incredibly well in the UK, really, really well. But so many just get left behind. Half of students not getting a minimum level of qualifications is absolutely shocking. And you can't go on to further education, you can't keep studying unless you get your 5 GCSEs. So that means so many people have to stop their school experience, have to try and go and get a job without any basic qualifications. We also have problems around financial illiteracy, by which I mean not understanding basic concepts around money. So not being able to look after money, not being able to keep a budget, not being able to set up a bank account. Really basic things. Not understanding how tax works. Not being able to save money because they don't know how much they're spending. Not being able to make decisions about jobs because actually they don't really understand how much that salary really means. And finally, this is a UK-wide problem. So these are the GCSE parts. This is a number of students who get those 5 GCSEs, which is sort of the minimum standard you should be expecting. And you see that even in the very best places, even in London, which is the best you get, 53% get that minimum standard that they need to get a good job. So, what to be done about it? So all those stories I told you were from my first term in teaching, and it was horrible. You go home every night exhausted after a day of teaching like that, and then working for 8 hours, 9 hours to try and get all the lessons ready for the next day in the hope, just that little bit of hope that the next day might be a little bit better than the day before. If you can imagine doing that for 4 months without a break, it was exhausting by the end of it. So what we decided is this wasn't working. It fundamentally didn't work to have students try and learn out of a textbook when they couldn't read, or trying to learn about business when they had no understanding of money, or when they couldn't even get a job in business anyway. It didn't make sense. So what I did instead, is think, well, actually, these students aren't stupid. They're not stupid. And although they're behaving terribly, really terribly, it's not because they're bad students. They're not bad people. It's because they don't see the point of what they're doing. And can you imagine sitting there every day and not being able to read what's going on? I mean, every day you sit for 5 hours in lessons where you haven't got a clue what's being said, where you know you're not going to get a good exam result at the end, where you know you're not going to be able to get a good job. And so actually it's that frustration and that feeling that I don't know what they don't know why they're there. So instead, we got them to set up their own small businesses. These girls, who, although they look nice in this photo, were really very hard work at the beginning of the year. What they did is that they set up a company which produced hand-designed trainers. So they'd buy these trainers, and they'd buy them, and they'd be plain white from the market, and they'd actually do all the designs on them themselves, so draw on all of the different designs. So if you had an idea of what you wanted your trainer to look like, you could go to them, and they'd create the design for you. Really, really clever idea. And they sold those, and they made some money, and they bought some more, and they sold some more, and they made a really good profit out of it. And those girls who'd been a real pain at the beginning of the year actually suddenly would be coming to class after school to ask if they could, if they could continue to work on their project, or would come and ask me for help in setting up a bank account where they could put the money in. Would ask me for advice on how to find cheaper products, or how to market to a wider audience. They really wanted to make this work. These girls, a different idea. So these girls set up a smoothie stall. Quite a basic idea, but actually, school food in the UK is terrible. And so to have something fresh and nice and tasty served to you at lunchtime, lots of people paid for it. Again, they made a really good amount of money out of doing that. This was at Christmas time. This is my classroom. By that point, I put the nice display back on the wall, if you can see. This time with staples rather than drawing pins. And the students are all selling. They're all selling their products. This was one room out of 5 rooms that we filled up with students selling things. And all the other students came in, bought from them, and they were so proud of themselves. That was the biggest sense of satisfaction, was having been the students who for years and years and years couldn't read, and for years and years and years were being told that they'd never get any exams or any qualifications. These were now the students who had a company, who were 14-year-olds with a company and a business, and they could show everybody. And for a reason at last, they had something they could be proud of and that people were impressed with them for. And we took them out to see other businesses as well. So this is, again, one of my other students. There was a terrible story with her, but I've decided I'm not going to tell you. So anyway, so she was, this was at UBS, which is one of the big investment banks. We took them all the way into London in the city. And this was her presenting her business plan to a room full of people from the company. And there she was, stood at the front, explaining her business and her plan and what she'd been doing. Oops. This was us on a trip in the city, posing with the statues. And actually, we took them out of that school environment, which had so many negative things about it, and we took them into top businesses like this. So here they were, learning about business, doing a day of business workshops. Because they're out of school, they're really excited about it, and they learned so much from doing really hands-on practical things. And here's me with some of the students. The one on the end's not smiling, but he is happy inside. That's the happiest he ever looked. So, I got to the end of my 2 years of teaching. As I said, the first term was horrible, really horrible. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. But after that first term, trying something completely different, something which I hadn't been taught to do, but which I'd tried really out of desperation, absolute desperation. Having tried that, the effect over the rest of the first year was absolutely incredible. So I had students who'd been told at the beginning that really they weren't likely to pass. If you imagine 50% of students in the whole country get 5 GCSEs. In my first year, 80% of my class got 5 GCSEs. In the second year, 96% of them got 5 GCSEs out of business. So it just shows that there is no good reason why every student can't get 5 good GCSEs in the UK. Absolutely none at all, because those were the kids who'd been told they weren't going to get any GCSEs. But by doing something hands-on and something really practical, actually they'd seen why it was useful. They could learn in a different way. And it was just incredible. So not only did they get the best, they got among the best results in the school, but also personally, they were transformed as well. So they went from being students who would be sat there angry, because they were quite angry, angry at the world for the fact that they couldn't read the textbook that was in front of them, and for being left behind. And they went from that to being really proud of what they'd done and really happy to talk to people about it. And I think it was that sense that actually, I think they sort of felt a relief in a way, that even if the exams didn't go as well as they wanted, they now knew that they could set up a business and that they'd be okay. And they were so much more relaxed, they were so much happier. And they had something that they could do that other people in the school couldn't do, even though they were always told that they were the ones who were left behind. And I was very lucky. I mean, I won a trip to New York. That was nice. And at the end of the 2 years of teaching, I had another job which I'd agreed in university that I was going to go off and do at the end of the 2 years. So I always knew it was going to be 2 years in teaching and then going off to become a management consultant. But at the end of those 2 years, I felt like I was onto something. You know, I felt like there was something there that I really wanted to share with other people and see if it would work for their students too. And that was when I started getting the idea of actually, could this be a social innovation? Could this be something that could be shared more widely and actually help an awful lot more students? So that's why I'm going to leave the first part of this story, and I'm going to hand over to Cynthia to take it to the next part. Thank you very much.
Tom and I are going to do a two-hander where he tells a story and then we use the business model canvas to help understand, and then we're going to get you to think about what you would do next, and then we're going to go back to Tom and find out what he really did next. And we hope that'll be a useful way of understanding his business model. Sorry to get behind you. So for the next bit, and for kind of all of the kind of pieces of work this morning, I just wanted to introduce this framework, which is the business model canvas framework. So it's a relatively simple framework with these 9 building blocks. And I'm going to talk through them. And they're a little bit difficult to understand at first. They're based on a book that was written by Alexander Osterwalder. I've actually got the book with me. And if any of you are interested, then please do come and have a look in breaks or later. Although it's a little bit complicated, I think it's easy to understand the first initial block. So we'll go through it, and then we'll spend a lot of time working through it together. So in the middle is what your offer is. So products and services, what value is and what do you offer. And on the right is the kind of value side of the equation. So who are your customers? And in the case of social innovations, who are your beneficiaries? Who pays for what you do and who receives what you do? Over here is your revenues. So what kind of revenues do you get and who pays? In this box here, customer relationships. So what kind of relationship do you have with customers and beneficiaries? Do you have to see them all the time? Do you not see them a lot? Do they take up a lot of energy to work with? What kind of relationship do you have? And channels is how do you work with them? So channels is, it could be a distribution channel, so how do you get your service or product to them? For example, if you sell milk, do you deliver milk to their door or do you put it in a shop? How do you get it to them? And on this side is the kind of efficiency side. So key activities is what you do. Key resources is what you have, what are your assets. Your partners over here, so who do you work with? And costs down here, what are your key costs? So that's the sort of overall framework. I'll leave that over here. Sorry to put that in your way. Is that going to work? I'll leave that here so you can see it. And then we'll talk through the first bit that Tom told us about. So in the beginning, over in the key resources section, there was Tom. So Tom, we know, had transformed from being what he says is a not very good teacher into, by all accounts, an excellent teacher. So he had himself. He had what sounds like a very effective teaching approach, and he knew he wanted to do something different than just teach the students directly himself. So the question open to him at that point was, who would benefit from a service that he would deliver? So, I mean, obviously the kids would benefit, but who else would benefit? And part of thinking about that is thinking about who might pay for it eventually. So, you know, if the kids do well, then I guess the school does better when they get better results. I guess society does better. I guess The government does better because they get better results. A whole bunch of different people benefit. So he was thinking about who would benefit. He was also thinking about who would pay. What customers might be interested in those kinds of benefits. So would parents pay for their teachers? Would parents pay if their kids got better results? The parents of the kinds of kids he was teaching. Would the government pay? Would the schools pay? Who might pay? And that was part of his search for an effective service and business model. And then on the back of that, what could he offer people? Would it be, how would it work? Would it be a set of resources he would send to the schools? Would it be some kind of Tom's teaching academy? How would it work? So those were the questions that he was facing. And for our first exercise that I'd like everybody to go back to do in a minute and do in groups, we're going to ask you to think about just precisely those questions to see what ideas you come up with. And the idea is that you come up with lots and lots of ideas. We're going to do a rapid fire set of people feeding back their ideas, and then we'll find out what Tom actually did. So when you go back to your groups in a minute, think about who would benefit, who would pay, and what products and services you might be able to offer them if you were in Tom's position. So for example, the kids might benefit, their parents might pay, and maybe he could offer an after-school club, Saturdays or evenings or something like that. Or maybe you think the government should pay, and what Tom should offer would be like a lobbying service. It's over to you. So when, in a minute, would you be able to go back to your groups? We don't have copies of the canvas, but you can draw out versions of that model on pieces of paper, draw out lots and lots of models, and in your groups discuss those three questions. Who would benefit, who would pay, and what services can you think of that might serve that purpose? Does that make sense? Do you have any questions?
I think the other thing to add is we want as many as possible.
As many as possible.
So it's all about getting as many ideas down on paper as possible. And as we said in the ground rules, the more the better, and that there aren't any wrong ideas at this point. So don't try and guess what I did, but think about all the different possibilities, all the things I could have done. You might discover a better one to the one I came up with.
True. And also, we're only going to give you 10 minutes. So the idea is to see also how much you can do in sort of 10 minutes. So back to your groups. Thanks.